بلجيكا أو مملكة بلجيكا هي دولة ذات نظام ملكي اتحادي في أوروبا الغربية، وهي عضو مؤسس في الاتحاد الأوروبي وتستضيف مقر الاتحاد. في بلجيكا لغتين رئيسيتين هما الهولندية المتكلمين بها حوالي 59%، ومعظمهم الفلمنكية، والمتكلمين بالفرنسية حوالي 41%، بالإضافة إلى مجموعة صغيرة من المتحدثين بالألمانية. تاريخياً بلجيكا، هولندا ولوكسمبورغ كانت تعرف باسم البلدان المنخفضة، والتي تستخدم لتغطية مساحة أكبر نوعاً ما من المجموعة الحالية للدول البنوكلوكس. وتاريخياً كانت بلجيكا تحمل اسم بلجيكا اللاتينية نظراً لانضمام بلجيكا إلى إحدى المقاطعات الرومانية. من نهاية العصور الوسطى حتى القرن ال17 كانت مركز مزدهر للتجارة والثقافة. من القرن ال16 حتى الثورة البلجيكية في عام 1830 عندما انفصلت بلجيكا عن هولندا، ودارت العديد من المعارك بين القوى الأوروبية على الأراضي البلجيكية، الأمر الذي أدى إلى أن يطلق عليها اسم ساحة المعركة في أوروبا. لقائنا هيكون مع سيادة سفير دولة بلجيكا بالقاهرة، هينورنا النهاردة في برنامج جسور. Welcome, Excellency, to our program.
Thank you, Dr. Tali. It's very nice of you to welcome me.
It's your first interview with the second channel today.
Thank you, Dr. Tahrim, and thank you for taking the pain to come to interview me. I'm very happy about this.
First of all, we need to shed light on our bilateral cooperation between Egypt and Belgium.
They're very ancient. They date back from Muhammad Ali, actually.
Okay.
The first relations were established in 1837, and if you imagine, the independence of Belgium was only in 1830. So as soon as we became independent, we tried to find some friends and some business partners, some trade partners, and so we established a consulate at this time. And it was a consulate because, of course, Egypt was still nominally under the Ottoman Empire, and so we couldn't, of course, establish an embassy. An embassy came as soon as this was possible.
How can you evaluate the investments, the Belgium investments here in Egypt?
I would say it's good, but it's not enough.
It's not enough.
It's not enough. We can do better. We have 1.5 billion euros trade a year, which is not bad, and which makes of Egypt our second biggest market in the Middle East. But come on, Egypt is 100 million inhabitants. It's a gigantic market. We can do better. That's why we are here. The ambassadors are very busy, both in Egypt with my Egyptian colleague in Brussels, and myself.
So how can we improve this investment in Egypt?
Well, I think we have a deficit of visibility. Belgians don't know Egypt very well, and Egyptians don't know Belgium very well. So we have to work on this, and that's why I'm very happy that you interview me today, of course.
We have our program is always dealing with our cooperation with different countries, and Belgium is a good friend of Egypt.
We have always been, in the 19th century, Belgium was the second economic power in the world, actually, the second industrial power in the world, believe it or not, for such a small country. But we have always been seen by Egypt as a kind of a friendly and innocuous country. We were actually small, which means for Egypt that had to defend its sovereignty very hardly during the 19th century and the 20th century. Belgium was a country that was not dangerous because we were so small and not politically motivated. And so this has been the reason why the relations have always been active and friendly.
العاصمة البلجيكية يوجد بها القصر الملكي والذي بني في عام 1775 ميلادياً. وسط مدينة بيرو يوجد متحف الشوكولاتة الذي يقع في وسط المدينة.
بلجيكا لديها أكبر عدد من القلاع، كما يوجد في بلجيكا أطول خط ترام في العالم، وهو يعتبر صديق للبيئة ويعمل بالكهرباء.
Egypt and Belgium has a great cooperation in archaeological field. So it started since 1907. So till now we have this good cooperation in this field.
Yes. Our interest for Egyptology dates back from Mr. Jean Capart, who was a kind of fat and clever archaeologist in 1907.
Okay.
And he was the one who kind of invented archaeology in Belgium. He was a very loud gentleman and very joyful. Somehow he convinced the royal family to take interest in the matter. And ever since, the royal family has been extremely interested on a personal basis for Egyptology. Queen Elizabeth, the wife of King Albert I of Belgium, was on the spot when Tutankhamun's tomb was discovered. Actually, she came a few months after, actually. But they had a dire interest to it, and even today, the royal family takes personal interest in what happens in this field. There are a few jewels in Belgium on this topic. In Brussels, we have a splendid museum, the Musée Royal d'Art et d'Histoire, that boasts a beautiful Egyptian collection.
Okay.
And this way also the fact of people such as Mr. Warroquier or Mr. Ampin that were actually enthusiastic buyers of Egyptian artifacts, and which made interesting collections, which are still today to be seen in Belgium. Universities, of course, have been very active in researching spots, let's say a bit forgotten spots, not only about the big Egyptian pharaonic dynasties, but also prehistoric sites, for example. We do extremely interesting research in prehistoric sites.
But it's difficult, prehistory in ancient Egypt.
Everything is easy in Egypt because it's so dry and so fantastic that everything is conserved. But of course it attracts less interest than the magnificent obelisks.
Okay.
But yes, on caves carved with prehistorical drawings, for example, we do extremely valuable and interesting research because we both know that the Egyptian civilization is the oldest in the world, and so on prehistoric time you also had jewels to be discovered. We are also very active on early Coptic times, and there we have two sites of research in Egypt. We are also active in Alexandria, for example, where we have a site where we do a very interesting discovery. It's nothing spectacular, it's just important for the knowledge of the civilization of those times.
So you visited, or I filmed, you didn't visit till now El-Minya, and you have a mission in El-Minya, in Deir el-Barsha. I filmed myself there with Dr. Harko.
Exactly, and that's personified in a way the Belgian interest. It's kind of discreet. It's not the big discovery. It's not the Saqqara coffins or mummies. It's I would say discreet and useful. And this is the case of that Deir el-Bahra site of research.
Deir el-Barsha, and I think you have also a mission in El Cap. It's very close to Luxor.
Indeed, on the necropolis, and that's also very interesting. I haven't been able to visit them, of course, because I just arrived, of course. But I will go to Minya as soon as possible.
Okay. You have also different missions everywhere in Egypt, and how many missions are working nowadays?
Well, it's COVID times, so for the moment we have none active, but we have 4 active missions in Egypt for the moment, and then cooperations on and off with universities. You know, it's quite an active field of cooperation.
العلاقات المصرية البلجيكية متميزة في كافة المجالات منذ أربعينيات القرن الماضي، وتأتي أهمية العلاقة بين البلدين نتيجة للموقع الإقليمي الذي تحظى به كلتا البلدين. العلاقات المصرية البلجيكية تاريخية، فهي تعود إلى وقت إنشاء حي مصر الجديدة على يد البارون مبان، ووجود المستكشف الشهير الأثري جون كابارات، والتي استمرت حتى اليوم. حي مصر الجديدة من أرقى ضواحي القاهرة الكبرى التي أسسها البلجيكي البارون مبان صاحب قصر البارون الأثري، والذي حرص الرئيس عبد الفتاح السيسي على افتتاحه مع مشروعات شرق القاهرة منذ عدة أشهر بعد انتهاء مشروع ترميمه وتحويله لمعرض أثري يحكي تاريخ حي مصر الجديدة ومظاهر ونمط الحياة في تلك الفترة الزمنية المميزة. إنشاء حي مصر الجديدة يرجع إلى عام 1905، وكان الهدف الرئيسي هو إنشاء خط سكة حديد وخطوط ترام لربط منطقة وسط القاهرة بالمدينة الجديدة، وأطلق عليه هليوبوليس، وهو اسم يوناني أطلقه اليونانيون على مدينة أون المصرية القديمة التي تعني مدينة الشمس، وكانت تجمع حي المطرية وعين شمس.
We have also a cooperation in restoration of the Baron Palace, and we have a lot of legends related to Baron.
Yes, the Baron is a very popular figure in Cairo. That's very amusing. Heliopolis was done by actually Belgian capital and done by the Baron Empin himself. He was one of those big captain of industry of the 19th century in Belgium, and his palace is a bizarre mix of Belgian style, because it's also inside it's kind of very Belgian, very 19th century, late Baroque Belgian. Yes. It is a bit Islamic too, and a bit Hindu. Yeah. It's a bizarre mix, but it's an interesting mix at that. It has been beautifully restored.
And in Heliopolis we have a lot of buildings having the Belgian architecture style.
It was Belgian and French architects, but it was not at all the Belgian architecture.
Okay, it's Belgian and French.
It's Belgian and French, but it's a kind of a coming together of Egyptian architecture and European architecture. Okay. And that's what makes it moving and valuable.
Since 3 years we had an exhibition about celebrating 150 years of the cooperation between Belgium and Egypt. There were a lot of photos related to the visits of the royal family.
They came several times, and they will come again.
Okay.
And let us hope that for the inauguration of the Grand Egyptian Museum, which is also made by a Belgian company, but we'll speak about this later, they will probably come too.
Okay.
Inshallah.
Inshallah.
Yes, it's ongoing interest, I would say.
Belgium and Egypt has also a great cooperation in the field of Egyptology and archaeology, and in the project of the Grand Egyptian Museum. So how many experts are working on this project?
It is actually a good case of a joint venture between a big Belgian architect bureau and a big Egyptian contractor. We work well together, Belgian and Egyptian companies. It's interesting to see that the values, the corporate values, are actually very compatible.
Excellency, we want to ask you about your visit to different places here in Egypt. You went already to Siwa, you visited several places in Cairo and in Luxor, I don't know. Where else?
Yes, as you know, Dr. Tariq, the diplomats are probably the most enthusiastic tourists in the world because they have to discover the country they're in. So I had the opportunity to go to Siwa, which is of course a beautiful place and a pearl of the Egyptian green tourism. So this is extremely another intelligent idea of the government is to develop special kinds of green tourism in Egypt, and Siwa has a bright future in this. And then Saqqara was until recently a kind of a secondary spot, but recent discovery have been so important that it will certainly be a major asset for Egyptian tourism in the future. We have been invited twice for ceremonies of uncovering the discovered mummies, which is of course at the same time beautiful and very moving, extremely moving. And Saqqara is a spot, a major spot for Egyptology and for tourism, which is for the moment still not fully exploited because it's the discoveries are so recent. And then my heart goes to beautiful mosques, I must say.
Mosques?
Yes.
You adore more the Islamic architecture?
I like very much Islamic and Coptic architecture.
Okay. So you visited Old Cairo?
So I visited Old Cairo. One of my favorite mosques in the world is probably Ibn Tulun.
So you visited the mosque of Ibn Tulun, and it's completely an copy of the Samarra mosque in Iraq.
Well, I think it's an example of the primitive mosques of Islam, which are beauty coming out of this building. And then, not far from there, there's of course the
Geyer Anderson Museum.
The Geyer Anderson Museum, which is of course extremely cute, and Coptic Cairo.
Okay.
I must say I was extremely moved when I came here 30 years ago by Saint Sarga, where
You were a student.
I was a student,
okay.
And I was really moved with what I saw what I lived in Saint Sarga. So I never forgot the place.
So you visited, when you went to Ibn Tulun Mosque, you visited the Geyer Anderson Museum.
Yes, Geyer Anderson, that's a poem, of course. It's an old British gentleman that made a collection, and you've got an impression of being out of time when you go to visit this wonderful and slightly dusty little museum. So it's a great moment of poetry, and it should stay so.
كان هناك منذ 3 سنوات تقريباً معرض صور تحت عنوان 150 عاماً من الزيارات الملكية البلجيكية لمصر، وكان المعرض يضم حوالي 60 صورة فوتوغرافية وعدداً من المخطوطات تعرض لأول مرة بمصر تحكي تاريخ الزيارات الملكية البلجيكية لمصر منذ أكثر من قرن ونصف قرن من الزمان. فيعد مجال التعاون الأثري بين مصر وبلجيكا من أهم مجالات التعاون في مجال العمل الأثري وتبادل الخبرات ودفع حركة السياحة الوافدة من بلجيكا إلى مصر، بالإضافة إلى بحث سبل التعاون في مجال المتاحف وتدريب الأثريين والمرممين.
You were in Egypt here as a student in the 80s, and now you are as an ambassador here. So you noticed the difference.
There's traffic is a bit better managed.
Really?
Yes. It was a nightmare when I was 30 years ago, and it's not very much better today. But the population has tripled, and it got still a little bit better.
Okay.
For the rest, we live, we diplomats tend to live in Zamalek, tend to live in Garden City. I was very astonished to discover 6th of October, New Cairo, which is to us something totally new, I didn't expect this. It's affluent, it's American. That's not where my heart beats. My heart beats for downtown.
Yeah, more Zamalek, Garden City. And
Yes, downtown and Garden City. That's where my heart beats. But I must say, this is the new reality of Cairo, and it's modern, and it's affluent, and it's dynamic. And for me, that was a real discovery.
We hope to have more Belgian tourists visiting Egypt after Corona.
On the good years, we have 130,000 Belgian tourists in Egypt, which is enormous, which is big.
Yeah.
If you imagine that we are only 11.5 million. And I think the government is doing all that's needed to attract more. For example, by opening museums near the touristic sites. And this is, of course, very attractive for the upper middle class of tourists in Belgium. So it's one of the major destinations, apart from Europe and the neighboring countries, it's one of the major destinations for Belgian tourists.
If you want to send a message to your Belgian viewers,
I would say sun and culture.
Sun and culture.
Sun and culture. Sun you can find not in Belgium, but in a lot of places. But sun and history, sun and culture, where else as Egypt? So this is really the policy that the government tries to implement, and it's brilliant. As we say in French, we should not make stupid bronzing. Il ne faut pas bronzer idiot. Well, in Egypt, you don't do stupid bronzing. You discover civilization.
You are going to be bronzed with the sun?
Yes, bronzed and clever.
Bronzed and clever.
I would say Belgians think they know Egypt, and actually they don't. It's infinitely more rich than what you get on television. It's not only mummies. It's not only desert. It's also modern city. It's also a great modern culture. So the message is come.
Excellency, what can Belgium offer to the lifestyle of the Egyptian people?
Well, Belgium are people who work hard and eat a lot. So I guess in the fields of gastronomy we can bring a lot of interesting things. Of course, our two specialties are beer and chocolate.
Beer and chocolate.
You know that beer in Egypt was a Belgian brand, and it's still a Belgian brand today in Egypt. Of course, it's not very much fashionable in Egypt, beer, and chocolate tends to melt with the heat. But we've got plenty of other things, and Belgian cuisine is renowned, and I will try during my time here to promote the Belgian cuisine in Egypt. We have other ideas. You know that we are absolute fans in Belgium of comic strips. Comics. Not only kids read them, but also adults. When I take the tube in Belgium, or when in the weekend, it's not at all unusual that I read a comic strips. And I find that being the inventors of hieroglyphs, the Egyptians should be better acquainted with comic strips. So we will try to take initiatives to make Belgian comic strip better known in Egypt, such as Tintin, such as Asterix, Lucky Luke, and all those kind of things.
I remember them.
Yes, and it's still very active in Belgium. So this is an interesting field of lifestyle. But of course, we've got plenty others. We've got furniture, we've got paintings, art. That's will be active in those fields, and cinema will be active in those fields too.
Excellency, we want to know how do you evaluate our investments or economic relations?
There again, it's very ancient. Do you know that the Mbaba Bridge, for example, on the Nile, was built by a Belgian company? To take an example. And we are extremely active, for example, on the pharmaceutical and chemical sector, which are probably one of the most important sector of industry in Belgium. But also buildings. We mentioned the Grand Egyptian Museum, and there are plenty of other cases of Belgian companies having built buildings on the skyline of Cairo. So no, we remain very active, and there are still very ambitious projects boiling in between Egypt and Belgium. The president, for example, has met several industrialists in the field of hydrogen.
Okay. Thank you, Excellency, for your time and the nice interview.
Thank you, Doctor. It was a great pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
بلجيكا تشتهر بسجادة الزهور، وهي عبارة عن سجادة طولها حوالي 96 متر، صنعت في عام 1971. كما تشتهر بوجود نموذج مصغر من أوروبا فيها، وهو عبارة عن نموذج مكون من 350 نموذجاً معمارياً. من أشهر المهرجانات التي تقام سنوياً في بلجيكا هو مهرجان تومورولاند، وهو احتفال سنوي ضخم خاص بموسيقى الرقص الإلكترونية، وكان انطلاق هذا المهرجان في عام 2005.